Howdy everyone, welcome to another episode of Devlogs. I can taste the end of the 201 certification, so let's waste no time and jump straight into lesson 6. We have configuring a music switch container, using a state with transitions, adjusting the default transition rule, and creating customized state groups for transitions. The lesson starts off talking about statuses in a game represented by music. For example, if you've ever played a competitive game and either won or lost, you might be familiar with what it sounds like to win or lose. The lesson suggests that a great way to set up a status system that plays different musical themes based on whether you win or lose can be done with a music switch container. We've been given 3 new music playlist containers to play with in the Lesson 6 Wise project: Defeated, Victory, and Story. We need for all of these playlist containers to be called under appropriate circumstances during gameplay, and so I'll put them all in as children objects of a music switch container. I'll name it Wise 201 Music, then I'll go through each playlist container's property settings and check the Override Parent button for the time window. This is because the music switch container cannot accommodate for the varying time properties of each playlist container, meaning I need to make sure each playlist container's time properties get recognized and not affected by their parent object. The switch container is now what needs to be called by the music event, and so I will go to the Events tab, open the music event, then drag and drop the switch container into the event space. Currently, the event cannot be called to playback music, and this is because we now need to configure the switch container. We are going to utilize states for musical transitions. I'm going to go to the Wise 201 switch container, and you'll see the Music Switch Container Association Editor appeared beneath the Property Editor. I'm going to add the Player Life State group here. When it is added, it appears with its possible states listed beneath. Associating a music playlist container with a state is as easy as dragging the playlist you want on top of a state. I'll do this for the Combat Music playlist and drag it on top of the Alive state. I'll drag the Defeated playlist to the Defeated state, and we now have 2 possible music paths. I can jump to the Transport Control view and open up the states tied to the switch container. Here, I can play back music and test out whether or not music plays when a certain state is enabled. You probably noticed that there wasn't an immediate change if I changed the state to something else while a track is playing. This isn't suitable because if we're in combat, the player is alive, the combat music is playing, then all of a sudden I get wrecked, then the defeat music should be called immediately and not take forever to come in. I'm going to fix this issue by going to the Transitions tab in the Property Editor for the Music Switch container. If you remember in the last video, we played very little with the transition properties and I said we'd get more into it next video, so here we are. We're going to click the transition bar so that it is highlighted and we can now access its properties below. I'm going to change the exit source to next bar, then test out the transitions. This is definitely a start, but it takes a bit too long for the change to happen. If a player was defeated and had to wait a whole bar of music for the defeated theme to transition on the downbeat of a measure, they'd probably have restarted the level or already rage quit. What we can do is create another transition, which will serve as an exception to the current transition rule we have. I'm going to click the Add Transition button, and you'll see a new one appears. For this transition rule, we want for any music theme that transitions to the defeated theme to happen immediately and not at the next bar. Where the transition says any on its bar, we can drag the defeated music playlist container to any on the rightmost side of the bar, which is the end result. Once that's done, all I have to do is go to the properties of this transition by having it highlighted, and I can now go to the exit source and change it to immediate. Before we can test, we have to add another transition to take one more thing into consideration. When the player responds, their state will be set back to alive, meaning we need a transition rule that goes from defeated to alive. When I create the new transition, I'll drag the defeated music playlist under source. Nothing else needs to be changed, so we can now test this. For a second, my transitions were not working appropriately. However, they suddenly fixed when I stopped recording on OBS, and so I had to do a separate tiny recording, which was, weird. Anyways, those transitions sounded way more appropriate. To take things a step further, we are going to create more state groups for transitional purposes. The state groups I create will be labeled to identify some common modes of gameplay the player undergoes. I'll go to the Game Syncs tab, create a music work unit, then create a state group called Music State. The states I will create under this will be named Boss, Gameplay, Story, and Victory. This alone leaves you to anticipate the transitional possibilities. I'm going to go back to the Audio tab, open the Music Switch container, then go in the Transitions view. In the Music Switch Container Association Editor, I will add our newly created state group, and you'll see 5 states appear beneath it. The None state is a default state, if you were wondering where that came from. Before I begin dragging and dropping music playlist containers onto the states, there's something new to consider, which is the fact we have 2 new state groups. We need to be able to define how the music behaves when 2 of these states are active at once. The way we can do this is by highlighting states from both state groups, then creating a new path. I'm going to highlight the Alive state, then the Boss theme state. When I create a path, it will include both those states, and we can now tell this path what to do when the player is both alive and fighting the boss. I'm going to associate the Boss music playlist container with the new path by dragging it under the Object section of the path. I'm going to drag the Victory music playlist container to the Victory state, but as a shortcut when doing this, we'll keep the Alive state highlighted under the Player Life state group. When I do this, the alive.victory path that is created is done so with the music playlist container already associated with it. I'll do the same thing when creating an alive.story path. For the gameplay state, I'll highlight the alive state with the combat music playlist container being dragged into the gameplay state. To call these states we've configured, we will be moving to the Events tab. The Cube game has event calls programmed into it that we will be utilizing to call forth our state changes. I'll start with a boss_start event, which in the game would get called at the start of the level that has a boss fight in it. You've seen me drag and drop audio objects into an event all the time, but this time we'll be adding an event by selecting Add, navigating to States, and then Set State. The music is already playing during the game, and so all this event is doing when it is called is changing the state of the music switch container. All that's left to do is, within the red box that is labeled Target, add the boss state that contains our transition into the boss music playlist container we configured earlier. I'll create another event for when a map is completed, which will be configured the same, and then I'm going to add some events to the music event. If you didn't know, you can have multiple actions occur in a single event that is called. I'll create another event for when a map is completed, which will be configured the same, and then I'm going to add some actions to the music event. If you didn't know, you can have multiple actions occur in a single event that is called. The order in which they're called will be from top to bottom. For the music event, I want to add the gameplay state, and so I do it how I've done for the other events. We now have 2 things happening in the music event, but we need the state to be applied first before the music switch container. We now have 2 things happening in the music event, but we need the state to be applied first before the music switch container is called. Otherwise, the switch container will not play music. To do this, I simply drag the state above the switch container. One last event I'll add is a stop event, and this is because it's possible for this music event to get called multiple times. If that happens, we need to make sure the playlist doesn't begin to have multiple songs playing at once, and so we'll use a stop event to halt the older playlist when a new one is called. The stop event will get moved to the top, assuring the old music is stopped before any new music gets called in. I also need to provide the stop event a target, which I do by dragging and dropping the music switch container into the target box. We are going to test these events being called with a Soundcaster session. This time, we'll be using an already created one called Music Testing, and so all I have to do is go to Views, Soundcaster, and then drag and drop my 2 new events onto the grid next to the music event. That concludes the lesson. As you can see, there were lots of cool transitions we set up. The next lesson will actually take this even deeper, so good job getting this far, and I hope you're excited to amp things up. That's all for this video though. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next video, have a good one.